Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, May 15th, 2025, and just a few days ago, we saw a Democratic victory, a flip in Omaha, one of the nation's 50 biggest cities. A very interesting city in particular, given its electoral implications, one of the few cities to have a direct impact on how their state's electors actually go, given that Nebraska, alongside with Maine, is one of two states that breaks down congressional districts and allows their individual districts to vote for a candidate for president. And in the last presidential election, Nebraska's 2nd District, which comprises a huge chunk of Omaha, voted for Vice President Kamala Harris against Donald Trump. Now, Donald Trump, of course, winning the state of Nebraska at large, President Trump had a victory in a number of other swing states, but that individual congressional district went against the grain of the rest of the state and voted for the Democratic Party. But Omaha in particular had always been tricky for Democrats. They hadn't been able to win the the mayor election in this city for a very long time. The Republican incumbent who was up for re-election this time around and did in fact run for a 4th term won her first race in May of 2013. It was an election against a Democrat, but it came off the 2012 election where Obama had become increasingly more unpopular since his re-election. And in 2013, his numbers weren't doing so great. So Omaha, despite being a more left-leaning city in totality, even today having more registered Democrats than Republicans, had still been very willing and open to vote for Republicans. But this election back in 2013 was actually a flip. It took a Democratic mayor and voted for a Republican mayor. But then came 2017, and the race tightened. And while it wasn't necessarily a victory for Democrats, and while this race, and again, I do have to include a caveat here by mentioning that these are nonpartisan races, but as the same way it was in Wisconsin's Supreme Court race, you very much know how these candidates align ideologically and which political parties are supporting which candidates. In 2017, in the first Trump term, Democrats were hoping that they might flip the race in Omaha, but it was too early into the Trump term for Democrats to really rally behind a candidate and really boost one in particular. What we saw here was that the Republican incumbent had been popular, she had been elected before, and in 2017, she was reelected by roughly 6 points. But then came 2021. Obama had lost the 2nd District in 2012, Hillary Clinton had lost the 2nd District in 2016, but Joe Biden won it back for Democrats in the 2020 election. So 2021 Democrats were hoping might go a little bit different. But not only did it not go a little bit different, it went very poorly for the Democratic Party, enough so that the Republican won by 30 points again across a city that was more left-leaning than right-leaning. So then came 2025. Democrats thought they might not be able to do well. The early primary results had indicated that Democrats were in the minority when it came down to collective vote share, but the results were clear. Just a few days ago, 2 days ago, in fact, Tuesday of this week, today's May 15th, it was May 13th. John Ewing Jr., Democrat, someone who had been endorsed by a number of top Democrats across the state. But the point is that in Nebraska and in this individual area, everything came down to who was mobilized to vote. Just take a look at the difference in total vote number between the 2021 election and the 2025 election. I mean, although we are still in the midst of getting total numbers here, we still find that the turnout did in fact go down, but it benefited the Democratic Party. Similar to what we have seen in other elections, where you are finding that on collective net from previous elections, from 2020, from 2024, turnout is down in special elections, turnout is down in regularly scheduled elections, in off elections, whatever it might be, but Democrats are benefiting from that. Why? Because their voting base seems to be more tapped in, more engaged, more likely to vote regardless of what the national top lines are saying, regardless of where it is for Trump, regardless of who's on the ballot. Democrats are turning out. And that's what we saw. John Ewing Jr. was able to win with 56% of the vote against a 12-year-long incumbent in this mayoral election. It was a massive flip for Democrats because, arguably speaking, again, based on what we saw in these early primary results, again, it's nonpartisan, but the top two advanced to a runoff, given that the incumbent did not receive 50% of the vote, 75,000 votes in total. What did we find? That in this top two race, you'll see the Republican incumbent 36%, the Democrat at 33%, the next Republican at 20%, and the next Democrat at just 10%. Combined vote share, Republicans should be winning 56 to 44. That's what our numbers argue, that Democrats should have been losing this race at bare minimum. And looking too at, how much money people are raising, arguably speaking, the Republican had more cash on hand. She had spent more. She'd been in a better position. The Democrat, however, still raised a comparable amount. The point is that in the actual election, the Democrats came ahead. 87,000 votes in turnout in total in terms of raw vote number, a smaller turnout than 2021, but again, benefiting the Democratic Party. And again, I think speaks to the same thing that we saw in 2021, and arguably too the narrowing of it in 2017, which was that the Republican Party saw warning signs in 2017 that it would eventually lead to their loss in 2020. Democrats saw warning signs in 2021 that it would eventually lead to their loss in 2024. Taking a look at 2013 even, Democrats saw warning signs in 2013 that would lead to their eventual loss in 2016. And now we are seeing similar warning signs for the GOP, not only here in Omaha, but we saw it in Wisconsin, right? We saw it in Florida. We saw it across the country in congressional districts that are holding special elections, in regularly scheduled elections that just so happen to be coinciding with 6 months after Donald Trump's, second term. We are seeing, truly speaking, not 6 months, rather 4 or 5 months, but still earlier on enough that it gave Donald Trump some leeway to allow, or his election rather is that point, not to say the start of the term, because we aren't 6 months, certainly not 6 months into the term, although I'm sure many people feel like it has been that way since the election. What we are finding here is that Omaha, compounded with many of the other elections we are seeing, are showing very clear signs. The Democrats are in a position where John Ewing Jr. is not the only example. We've seen many of them where Democrats are yet again outperforming. Another special election actually that took place across the country on the same day, May 13th. We'll talk about that in a future video. I don't think it's going to get its own individual one, but it would be assumed as part of the collective. Democrats making improvements in Oklahoma. Again, all across the board. And while it isn't saying that there are, 30% of the country is changing their minds on their votes, right? That 30% of Trump supporters are suddenly emboldened and engaged for the Democratic Party. That is not the case. But what we are seeing is absolutely a difference in turnout, a difference in enthusiasm, and one that is solely benefiting the Democratic Party. And so while it isn't shocking to me that in a state that voted for Trump by 20 points, in an individual district that voted for Harris by 5 points, the Democrats are able to win the city. But what is surprising is that Republicans have been able to hold it for 12 years, and now Democrats are able to get rid of them. Not in 2013 when Obama was president. Not in 2017 when Trump's approval rating was lower then than it is today. Not in 2021 after Biden just won this district and this city, to be clear, by double digits in the 2020 election. And then in 2024, Harris does worse than than Biden did in 2020, but arguably better than Clinton, but different congressional districts, though it was one drawn to be more favorable to the GOP. What we find is it is now the Democrats are winning. It is now that Democrats are flipping this mayoral election. And while I'm not trying to say that the mayoral election has implications on the national level that should be taken to the highest degree, I do not think that special elections and mayoral elections and off-year elections are truly indicative of what we will see. I do think they give us a good idea. I don't think they're one for one, and they're never amazingly predictive in American politics. Nothing ever is. But what this is telling us is that in concrete election results, there is something to be said that Democrats are winning now when they weren't able to win before. The Democrats are competing in areas that they never even thought that they could start to look at in previous elections. We've seen in Pennsylvania, that state Senate district, that Trump won by over 20 points flipping to the Democratic Party was the sole reason that we saw Elise Stefanik's nomination to the United Nations pulled by the Trump administration. Why? Because her congressional district was won by 21 points. And if Democrats were winning in areas Trump won by 20, they might have been able to flip that seat. And in a House majority that is so exceptionally narrow, they couldn't afford to lose her because they were afraid that they would. And in results like this, where you have a swing of epic proportions, I mean, we saw that the Republicans were able to win here by over 30 points in the last election to lose now by double digits. This is a 40-point swing. And again, I don't think it's that 35% of those voters have changed their minds from being Republicans versus Democrats. It's all about who's engaged. It's all about who wants to turn out, why they want to turn out, where they're turning out, and who they're turning out for. And in 2025, and in this present day and age, it is Democrats who hold that upper hand. It is a result that they're very happy about and one that is notable because it was unable to be done for the past 12 years. And all it took was Donald Trump being president again. It took Democrats messaging on things in a way that they hadn't been doing before in the past 12 years in this city, and it resulted with a Democratic victory in a very large city, in a city that will largely dictate how Nebraska's 2nd District votes in the next presidential election, if they are given that option. And it will be very interesting to see what happens in future elections. And right now, I think Democrats should look at this. They should celebrate it. It doesn't mean everything, but it is certainly one piece of the puzzle that is fitting out to be what might be a blue wave in 2026, but only time will tell. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch and then a playlist for my 2026 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and then I will see you all later today.